What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected and usually calm actors walks onto one of daytime television's most outspoken panels, expecting a thoughtful conversation about his latest project, and instead finds himself in the middle of a tense on-air disagreement that slowly escalates into one of the most uncomfortable moments the show has had all season? Make sure to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The cameras are already rolling as the familiar music of The View fades out and the studio audience finishes applauding. Around the table, the hosts settle into their seats with their coffee mugs while the mood feels light and energetic. At the center of the table sits Whoopi Goldberg, ready to guide the conversation the way she always does. Next to her is Sunny Hostin, flipping through a few notes in front of her. Beside her, Joy Behar leans back slightly, smiling toward the audience. The final seat at the table is filled by Sarah Haynes, who looks excited as the show moves into the next segment. Whoopi turns toward the camera. So our next guest, she begins with a grin, is an Academy Award-nominated actor who has been in some incredible films over the years, and he's here today to talk about his latest project and what he's been working on lately. The audience begins clapping again as Whoopi continues. You know him from films like Nightcrawler, Brokeback Mountain, and so many others. Please welcome the very talented Jake Gyllenhaal. The studio doors open and Jake Gyllenhaal walks out to loud applause. Jake smiles warmly, waving to the audience as he approaches the table. He looks relaxed, dressed casually but polished, and he greets each of the hosts one by one. Good to see you, Whoopi says as they shake hands. Thank you for having me, Jake replies, settling into the guest chair. Joy leans forward immediately. You look well, she says with a playful grin. You've been busy. Jake laughs softly. Trying to stay busy, yeah. The audience chuckles lightly. Whoopi begins the conversation in the easy, friendly tone the show is known for. So let's start with the new project, she says. Because everyone's been talking about it. Tell us what drew you to this role. Jake nods, clearly comfortable. Well, honestly, it was the story. It's one of those scripts where you read it and immediately feel like you understand the character. It's complicated, it's emotional, and it felt like something worth exploring. Sunny nods politely, but is already glancing down at her notes. Sarah smiles. And you've always chosen interesting characters, she says. They're never simple. Jake shrugs modestly. I think the interesting ones are the flawed ones. The audience murmurs in agreement. Joy jumps in. But you've also done intense roles. I mean, Nightcrawler that was something else. The audience laughs. Jake grins. Yeah, that one was definitely a little darker. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. A little. The crowd laughs again. For the first few minutes, the conversation stays relaxed. They talk about acting, preparation, and the way Jake approaches complicated characters. Then Sunny leans forward. Her tone changes slightly, still polite, but noticeably more serious. Well, Jake, she says carefully, a lot of the conversation around your new film isn't just about the acting. It's also about the themes it deals with. Jake nods slowly. Sure. Sunny continues. And some critics have said that the way the story approaches certain social issues might be a little outdated. There's a small shift in the energy at the table. The audience grows quieter. Jake tilts his head slightly. Outdated in what sense? Sunny glances briefly at her notes again. Well, she says, some people feel the film presents certain perspectives that don't fully reflect the way those conversations are happening today. Joy jumps in quickly. Oh, here we go, she says with a half laugh. The audience laughs lightly. But Sunny keeps going. I'm just curious how you respond to that, she says. Because actors today are often expected to think carefully about the cultural impact of the stories they tell. Jake listens closely. He nods again, but this time his expression is more thoughtful. I think that's a fair question, he says calmly. Whoopi watches closely, sensing the shift in tone. Jake continues. But I also think storytelling is meant to show different viewpoints. Sometimes uncomfortable ones. Sunny nods slowly. But should there be responsibility attached to that? She asks. Jake pauses for a moment before answering. I think responsibility exists, he says. But I don't think storytelling works if every character is designed to represent the correct point of view. A few audience members clap softly. Sunny tilts her head slightly. So you don't believe actors have a responsibility to consider how audiences interpret those stories? Jake answers immediately. I think we do. But I also think audiences are intelligent enough to interpret complexity. Joy nods enthusiastically. Exactly. Sunny glances briefly toward Joy before returning her attention to Jake. But the concern, Sunny says carefully, is that sometimes complexity can also reinforce harmful ideas if it's not handled carefully. The audience becomes quieter again. Jake's posture straightens slightly. I understand the concern, he says. But I also think it's dangerous when we start expecting every piece of art to function as a moral lesson. A few louder claps ripple through the audience. Sunny folds her hands together. I don't think anyone's asking for a moral lesson, she replies calmly. But when a film touches on real issues, social issues, people are going to question the perspective. Jake nods slowly. Of course they will. Whoopi steps in briefly. That's part of the conversation, she says. But Sunny isn't quite finished. And some people feel, she continues, that actors sometimes avoid acknowledging the influence they have when these topics come up. Jake leans back slightly in his chair. The shift is subtle, but noticeable. I'm not avoiding anything, he says evenly. Sunny raises an eyebrow. I'm not saying you are. Jake smiles politely, but the smile doesn't fully reach his eyes. I just think the conversation sometimes assumes actors are the ones responsible for every interpretation. Joy jumps in again. That's true, though. Sunny turns toward Joy. Well, media figures do influence culture. Jake exhales slowly. Yes, he says. But culture is also shaped by audiences, critics, journalists, politicians, everyone. The audience murmurs again. Whoopi looks back and forth between them. Jake continues. And sometimes the pressure on artists to explain every decision can make creativity difficult. Sunny responds quickly. But accountability doesn't stop creativity. The room grows noticeably quieter. Jake nods once. No, he says. But sometimes the conversation around accountability becomes accusatory. Sunny leans forward slightly. Is it accusatory to ask questions about impact? Jake looks directly at her now. No, he says calmly. But sometimes the tone of those questions suggests the answer is already decided. The audience reacts with a mixture of murmurs and applause. Joy lets out a soft Sunny's expression tightens slightly. Well, I think it depends on how the question is asked. Jake smiles again, this time a little more tightly. Exactly. Whoopi senses the tension rising. She leans forward, attempting to lighten the moment. Well, this is getting spicy for a Thursday morning. The audience laughs. But the tension at the table hasn't fully disappeared. Sunny glances down at her notes again, then back at Jake. Let me ask you something directly, she says. Jake nods. Sure. Sunny folds her hands. Do you believe actors should ever turn down roles if they think the message might be harmful? The audience goes quiet again. Jake pauses before answering. He looks thoughtful, but also slightly guarded now. Well, he says slowly, that depends on what you define as harmful. Sunny immediately responds. Something that reinforces harmful stereotypes. Jake takes a breath. I think context matters. Sunny presses further. But if you know people will interpret it that way? Jake's tone stays calm. People interpret things in many different ways. Sunny leans back slightly. So that's not a concern for you? Jake pauses again. This time the pause is longer. And the tension at the table becomes unmistakable. The audience senses it. Some people shift in their seats. Jake finally answers. It's always a concern, he says. But I don't believe avoiding difficult stories is the solution. Sunny watches him closely. And if those stories hurt people? Jake looks directly at her again. That's not the intention. Sunny responds quietly. But intention doesn't erase impact. The audience reacts with a low murmur. Jake's expression changes slightly now. Still composed. But clearly more serious than when he first sat down. Whoopi glances between them. Joy folds her arms, watching carefully. Sarah shifts slightly in her seat. The conversation has moved far beyond the friendly film promotion it started as. And everyone at the table can feel it. Jake leans forward slightly. Can I ask you something? He says. Sunny nods. Of course. Jake's voice remains calm, but there's a firmness to it now. Do you think actors should only tell stories that everyone agrees with? Sunny answers immediately. No, but I think they should be prepared to answer for the ones they choose. The audience reacts again, louder this time. Jake nods slowly. Fair enough, but his expression suggests the conversation is far from over. And the tension that's building around the table is only just beginning. The audience reaction slowly settles, but the tension around the table is still there. Jake Gyllenhaal keeps his hands folded in front of him on the table for a moment, thinking about what Sunny Hostin just said. There's a brief pause that feels longer than it actually is. Then Jake nods slightly. Okay, he says calmly. That's fair. I don't have a problem answering questions about my work. Sunny gives a small nod. And that's all I'm asking. But the tone still feels sharp. Whoopi Goldberg senses it immediately. She leans forward slightly, trying to guide the conversation. Well, Whoopi says movies have always pushed people's buttons. That's kind of what art does. A few audience members clap lightly. Jake nods. Exactly. But Sunny speaks again before the moment fully relaxes. Yes, but there's a difference between pushing boundaries and repeating narratives that have historically hurt certain groups. The audience quiets again. Jake looks at her carefully. I hear what you're saying, he replies. But I think sometimes we assume a story is endorsing something when it's actually examining it. Sunny responds quickly. But audiences don't always see that distinction. Joy Behar jumps in. Well, audiences also don't all think the same way, says Joy Behar. Some applause breaks out. Sunny turns slightly toward Joy. True, she says, but when you have a platform as big as Hollywood, the conversation matters. Jake nods again. I agree with that. Sarah Haynes speaks up, trying to soften the tone. Sarah Haynes smiles slightly. I think people forget that actors don't control every part of a film either, she says. There are writers, directors, producers. Jake smiles appreciatively. Exactly. But Sunny isn't backing away from the topic. Yes, but actors do choose the roles, she says. Jake leans back slightly in his chair. And I chose this one because it asks difficult questions. Sunny tilts her head. But does it answer them? Jake pauses. No, he says honestly. And I don't think it's supposed to. There's a murmur from the audience. Sunny continues. So then isn't there a risk that audiences walk away with the wrong message? Jake exhales slowly. I think audiences deserve the freedom to think. Joy nods again. Exactly. Sunny looks back at Jake. But you understand why people might be concerned. I do, Jake says. The conversation feels like it might finally settle down. But then Sunny flips a page in her notes. And another point critics have raised, she continues, is that Hollywood often tells these stories without including enough voices from the communities being represented. The audience murmurs again. Jake listens quietly. Sunny continues. So some people feel actors sometimes participate in stories that speak about people rather than with them. Jake's expression changes slightly. He straightens up. I think that's an important conversation, he says. Sunny nods. So how did your film address that? Jake pauses. Well, we had a diverse creative team involved. Sunny responds almost immediately. But was anyone from the community directly involved in shaping the narrative? The question hangs in the air. Jake hesitates slightly. Not specifically in the writing room, he admits. The audience reacts with a soft murmur. Sunny nods slowly. Okay. Jake notices the reaction. But that doesn't mean the film ignores those perspectives, he adds. Sunny leans forward again. But representation behind the scenes matters too. Jake nods. I agree. Whoopi steps in again. And Hollywood's been trying to improve that, she says. Sunny nods politely. Yes, but progress has been slow. Jake crosses his hands again on the table. I think progress is always slower than people want it to be. Sunny replies calmly. But that doesn't mean we stop pushing for it. The audience applauds. Jake nods respectfully. Absolutely. For a moment, it seems like the conversation might settle again. But Sunny continues. Let me ask you something else, she says. Jake nods. Sure. Sunny looks directly at him. Do you think actors sometimes hide behind the phrase, it's just a story, to avoid deeper accountability? The audience gasps softly. Joy looks sideways toward Sunny. Jake pauses. This time the pause is noticeably longer. Finally he speaks. I don't think that's what I'm doing. Sunny responds calmly. I didn't say you were. Jake gives a small smile. But the implication is there. The audience reacts with a few murmurs. Whoopi watches closely. Sunny keeps her voice measured. My point is that storytelling has power. Jake nods again. I agree. Sunny continues. And with power comes responsibility. Jake's voice becomes slightly firmer. Yes, but responsibility doesn't mean creative fear. A few claps break out. Sunny shakes her head slightly. No one is asking for fear. But sometimes it feels like people are asking for permission, Jake replies. The audience reacts louder this time. Joy smiles. Sunny sits back in her chair slightly. Well, she says. If a story risks reinforcing harmful stereotypes, I think it's fair to question it. Jake nods slowly. It is. Then he adds something that changes the mood again. But sometimes it feels like the criticism starts before anyone has actually seen the full story. The audience reacts with louder applause. Sunny looks at him carefully. Critics saw the film. Jake nods. Some critics. Sunny tilts her head. And they raised concerns. Jake's tone becomes slightly sharper. And that's their job. Sunny responds immediately. And responding to those concerns is part of yours. The audience gasps lightly. Joy looks between them. Okay, now we're getting into it, she mutters half-jokingly. A few people laugh nervously. Jake shifts in his chair. I'm here answering the questions, he says calmly. Sunny nods. Yes, but some of your answers sound like you're dismissing the concerns. Jake's eyebrows lift slightly. I'm not dismissing them. Sunny responds. Then what are you doing? Jake takes a breath. I'm explaining that stories are complicated. Sunny speaks again, slightly firmer now. But harm can also be complicated. The room goes quiet again. Sarah glances toward Whoopi. Whoopi folds her hands. Jake looks at Sunny for a moment before speaking. I think we're having two different conversations, he says. Sunny responds quickly. I think we're having the same one. Jake leans forward slightly. Well, it feels like you're asking for certainty from something that's meant to provoke thought. Sunny raises her eyebrows. And it feels like you're avoiding acknowledging the potential harm. The audience reacts louder now. Jake sits back again. I'm not avoiding anything. Sunny's tone tightens. Then acknowledge it. There's a noticeable reaction from the audience. Joy turns slightly toward Whoopi. Okay, this is getting tense, she says quietly. Whoopi nods. Jake looks at Sunny again. I have acknowledged it, he says calmly. But I'm not going to say that artists should only tell safe stories. Sunny responds immediately. No one asked for safe stories. Jake's voice becomes slightly more frustrated. But that's what the conversation starts to sound like. Sunny leans forward. Or maybe it sounds like accountability. The audience erupts into mixed reactions. Applause from some, murmurs from others. Jake pauses again. Then he shakes his head slightly. I think this conversation is starting to go in circles. Sunny replies quickly. It's only going in circles because you won't answer the question directly. The audience reacts again. Jake's expression hardens just a little. I have answered it. Sunny's voice remains calm but firm. You answered around it. The tension at the table is now undeniable. Whoopi raises a hand slightly. All right, hold on. But Jake speaks again before she finishes. What exactly would you like me to say? He asks Sunny. The audience goes silent. Sunny meets his gaze. I'd like you to acknowledge that the stories actors choose can reinforce harmful narratives, and that choosing them anyway is a decision. Jake looks at her for a long moment. The pause stretches. Then he replies, I think audiences are smarter than that. A loud reaction ripples through the studio. Sunny sits back slowly. Well, she says, that's where we disagree. And suddenly the conversation doesn't feel like a normal talk show debate anymore. It feels personal. And everyone at the table can feel the shift. The silence that follows that last exchange lingers for a moment longer than anyone at the table expected. The audience inside the studio for the view shifts uncomfortably, sensing the conversation has moved far away from the relaxed interview it began as. Jake Gyllenhaal leans back slightly in his chair, folding his hands together again, clearly trying to keep his composure. Across the table, Sunny Hostin watches him carefully. The moment is tense, but not explosive yet. Whoopi Goldberg clears her throat, attempting to guide things back to calmer ground. All right, Whoopi says with a small smile toward the audience. You see what happens when actors come here, we make them work. The crowd laughs lightly, grateful for the attempt to break the tension. Jake smiles faintly as well. I didn't realize I was walking into a debate panel, he jokes. Some people in the audience laugh. But Sunny responds quickly. Well, when you come to this table, she says, gesturing slightly around the hosts, we talk about the bigger picture. Jake nods. I understand that. For a moment, it seems like the tone might settle again. But then Sunny continues. And the reason these conversations matter is because people watching at home care about how stories shape the culture. Jake sighs quietly, though he tries to keep it subtle. I agree with that. Sunny tilts her head slightly. But you also said audiences are smarter than the criticism being raised. Jake shakes his head gently. That's not exactly what I said. Sunny responds immediately. You said audiences are smarter than the idea that stories can reinforce harmful narratives. Jake leans forward again now. What I said was that audiences can interpret stories without being told exactly how to feel about them. Joy Behar nods again. Joy Behar leans in. That's been true forever, she says. People watch movies and debate them afterward. A few claps ripple through the audience. Sunny turns slightly toward Joy. Yes, but there are also real consequences when media repeatedly reinforces certain narratives. Jake responds before anyone else can jump in. But that assumes the audience is passively absorbing everything. Sunny's tone tightens just slightly. Sometimes they are. Jake pauses. Then he shakes his head. I think that underestimates people. The audience reacts with a mix of applause and murmurs. Sunny responds calmly. Or maybe it acknowledges that influence is real. Jake sits back again. And influence exists everywhere. Sunny nods. Yes, but Hollywood is one of the most powerful storytellers in the world. Jake looks at her for a moment. And talk shows aren't, he says. There's a sudden burst of reaction from the audience, some laughter, some gasps. Joy's eyebrows lift immediately. Sarah Haynes leans back in her chair slightly. Sarah Haynes lets out a small, "oh wow," under her breath. Sunny looks momentarily surprised by the comment. Then she responds, "We're not making movies." Jake shrugs. "You're shaping public opinion." The audience reacts louder this time. Sunny crosses her arms lightly. "And we're also asking questions." Jake nods. "And I'm answering them." Sunny responds quickly. "Sometimes." The room goes quiet again. Whoopi glances toward Jake. "All right," she says calmly. "Let's keep this respectful." Jake nods immediately. "I'm being respectful." Sunny replies, "I am too." Joy leans slightly toward Whoopi. "Well, this is definitely the most awake the audience has been all morning," she jokes. The audience laughs again, though the tension is still obvious. Jake shifts in his chair. "I didn't come here to argue," he says. Sunny replies just as quickly. "Neither did I." Jake exhales. "But it feels like you already decided what the answer should be." Sunny shakes her head. "No, I decided the question deserved to be asked." Jake pauses. "And I answered it." Sunny raises her eyebrows. "You answered it by saying the audience is smarter than the criticism." Jake's patience is starting to wear thin. "No," he says. "I answered it by saying stories are complex." Sunny leans forward again. "And I asked whether creators should acknowledge when those stories might cause harm." Jake's voice becomes slightly firmer now. "I said harm isn't the intention." Sunny responds immediately. "But intention doesn't erase impact." A few audience members clap again. Jake shakes his head slowly. "We already went over that." Sunny's tone becomes sharper. "Yes, and you dismissed it." Jake's eyes widen slightly. "I didn't dismiss it." Sunny holds her ground. "You minimized it." The reaction in the room is immediate. A louder murmur spreads through the audience. Joy glances toward Whoopi again. Whoopi rubs her temple lightly, clearly realizing the segment is slipping out of the usual rhythm. Jake sits back again, clearly frustrated now. "I think what's happening here," he says carefully, "is that you're asking me to agree with a very specific interpretation of a film." Sunny answers instantly. "No, I'm asking you to acknowledge the criticism." Jake spreads his hands slightly. "I have." Sunny shakes her head. "You said the audience is smarter." Jake's voice raises just slightly, still controlled but noticeably stronger. "Because they are." The audience erupts into mixed reactions again. Sunny leans back. "Well, that's a convenient way to avoid the question." Jake laughs once, a short, disbelieving laugh. "I'm not avoiding anything." Sunny responds calmly. "Then say it." Jake looks at her directly. "Say what?" Sunny answers. "That actors sometimes choose stories that reinforce harmful narratives." Jake pauses. The room goes completely silent. Even the audience seems to sense that this moment matters. Jake finally speaks. "I think stories can be interpreted in many ways." Sunny sighs. "That's not the same thing." Jake rubs his hands together, clearly frustrated now. "You're asking for a very specific statement." Sunny responds. "I'm asking for accountability." Jake shakes his head. "No," he says quietly. "You're asking for agreement." The audience reacts again, louder this time. Sunny's expression tightens. "Do you hear how defensive that sounds?" Jake looks genuinely surprised now. "Defensive?" Sunny nods. "Yes." Jake exhales sharply. "I'm defending storytelling." Sunny responds quickly. "And I'm defending the people affected by those stories." A wave of applause sweeps through part of the audience. Jake looks around the room briefly. Then he looks back at the table. "You know what?" he says slowly. "I think we've probably taken this conversation as far as it can go." Sunny tilts her head. "Or maybe you just don't like where it went." Jake's patience finally cracks just a little. "No," he says firmly. "I don't like being told what my intentions are." Sunny answers. "I didn't tell you your intentions." Jake stands his ground. "You said I was minimizing harm." Sunny shrugs slightly. "That's how it sounded." Jake sits there for a moment, clearly weighing whether to continue. Whoopi tries again to step in. "All right, maybe we should." But Jake interrupts, though not aggressively. "No, it's okay," he says. Then he turns slightly towards Sunny again. "I came here to talk about a film." Sunny responds. "And we're talking about what that film represents." Jake shakes his head again. "This isn't a conversation anymore." Sunny raises an eyebrow. "Because someone challenged you?" The audience gasps audibly. Jake goes quiet for a moment. Then he pushes his chair back slightly. Not standing yet, but clearly preparing to. Whoopi notices immediately. "Hey, hold on," she says. But Jake is already leaning forward to remove his microphone. The audience erupts into a mix of shocked murmurs and scattered applause. Joy's eyes widen. "Wait, are you serious?" she says. Sarah looks stunned. Sunny watches silently. Jake stands up from the chair. He keeps his voice calm, but the frustration is obvious now. "I think I'm done with this conversation." The audience reacts loudly now. Whoopi raises her hands. "Jake, hold on, we're just having a discussion." Jake shakes his head. "No," he says. "This stopped being a discussion a few minutes ago." Sunny responds from her seat. "It's a discussion you didn't like." Jake pauses. Then he gives a short nod. "Exactly." The tension in the room is now electric. And as Jake turns slightly away from the table, it becomes clear the moment is about to become one of the most talked about exits the show has had in a long time. For a moment, the studio is filled with nothing but noise. Some people in the audience gasp. Others begin clapping, unsure whether they're reacting to the tension or the sheer shock of what's happening. Jake Gyllenhaal stands beside the table, microphone now in his hand, looking calmer than anyone expected in a moment like this. Across from him, Sunny Hostin remains seated, watching him carefully. At the center of the panel, Whoopi Goldberg raises both hands slightly in the universal gesture of someone trying to slow everything down. "Jake," Whoopi says calmly, "hold on a second." The audience quiets a little, sensing that the moment could still turn in another direction. Jake pauses but doesn't sit back down. "I respect the conversation," he says. "I really do." His tone is controlled, but the frustration underneath is still there. "But I don't feel like this is a fair discussion anymore." Sunny responds from her seat, her voice measured. "It's fair to ask questions." Jake nods once. "And I answered them." Sunny replies quickly. "You answered around them." The audience reacts again with a ripple of murmurs. Joy Behar leans forward, clearly trying to stop the situation from spiraling further. Joy Behar gestures toward Jake. "Listen," Joy says, "nobody here is trying to attack you." Jake looks toward her. "I didn't say you were. But it feels like you're treating criticism as if it's unfair," Sunny says. Jake shakes his head. "No, I'm saying the conversation turned into something different." Sarah Haynes jumps in, her tone noticeably softer. Sarah Haynes looks between both of them. "I think maybe we all just got a little heated," she says. "This happens when people care about the topic." A few audience members clap lightly. But Jake still hasn't sat down. He looks toward Whoopi again. "I came here to talk about the work," he says. Whoopi nods. "And you did. But the conversation kept coming back to what I should believe about it," Jake adds. Sunny shakes her head slightly. "No, it came back to whether creators acknowledge impact." Jake exhales slowly. "And I said they should." Sunny answers immediately. "But you stopped short of acknowledging the criticism directly." The audience reacts again. Jake looks out toward the crowd for a moment. Then he looks back at the table. "I think the criticism has been acknowledged plenty," he says. Sunny raises her eyebrows. "Not by you." Another murmur spreads through the audience. Whoopi leans forward again. "All right," she says firmly. "We are not going to keep going in circles." Jake nods respectfully toward her. "I appreciate that." He sets the microphone gently on the table. But he doesn't move back toward the chair. Joy watches him closely. "You're really leaving?" she asks. Jake gives a small shrug. "I think that's probably best." The audience reacts loudly again, a mix of applause, surprise, and confusion. Sunny folds her hands on the table. "Well," she says quietly, "that's your choice." Jake nods once. "Yes, it is." Whoopi tries one last time. "Jake, look, debates happen here. That's part of the show." Jake smiles politely. "I understand that." Then he adds something that immediately makes the room buzz again. "But debates usually involve both sides listening." The audience erupts again. Sunny shakes her head. "That's not what happened." Jake doesn't respond to that. Instead, he turns toward the audience. "Thank you for having me," he says sincerely. Some people clap. Others remain silent, clearly unsure how to react. Jake gives a brief nod toward the hosts and then walks toward the studio exit. The cameras stay wide as he leaves the set. The doors close behind him. And for a few seconds, no one at the table speaks. Finally, Joy breaks the silence. "Well, that escalated quickly." The audience laughs nervously. Whoopi exhales slowly and leans back in her chair. "That's live television," she says. Sunny sits upright again. "I asked reasonable questions," she says. Joy shrugs. "Maybe a few too many of them." A small ripple of laughter moves through the audience. Sarah tries to lighten the mood again. "I think we all care about storytelling and accountability," she says carefully. Sunny nods. "And that's exactly why the conversation matters." Whoopi glances toward the camera. "Well," she says with a half smile, "sometimes the conversation gets a little more intense than expected." The audience laughs again. "But that's what this table is for," she adds. The show quickly moves to a commercial break. But what just happened on The View is already spreading far beyond the studio. Within minutes, clips of the moment begin appearing online. On X, TikTok, and YouTube, viewers replay the exact moment Jake Gyllenhaal pushed his chair back and stood up. Some people praise him for walking away from what they see as an unfair interview. Others criticize him, saying he avoided answering a legitimate question from Sunny Hostin. Entertainment websites quickly start posting headlines about the tense exchange. Morning talk shows begin discussing the moment later that day. Some commentators say the interview simply showed the kind of passionate debate that daytime television often produces. Others say the conversation crossed the line from debate into confrontation. Meanwhile, viewers who watched the segment live continue arguing about it online. Some defend Sunny, saying she was doing her job as a journalist and host. Others say the questioning became repetitive and confrontational. Clips showing Jake's final line, "Debates usually involve both sides listening," spread rapidly across social media. Back inside the studio, the hosts eventually return from commercial. Whoopi briefly addresses the moment again. "You know," she says calmly, "these conversations aren't always easy." Sunny nods. "But they're important." Joy adds with a small shrug. "And sometimes people walk away." The audience laughs lightly again. Sarah smiles. Hopefully the conversation continues, just maybe with a little less tension. The show moves on to the next segment, but the atmosphere still feels slightly different. Everyone in the room knows something unusual just happened. And by the end of the day, that short, tense exchange becomes one of the most talked about talk show moments of the week. Viewers debate who was right. Some say Jake handled the situation with patience until the conversation became too confrontational. Others argue Sunny was simply pushing for accountability and meaningful discussion. Either way, the moment becomes another example of how unpredictable live television can be. And moments like this are exactly why audiences keep watching. So what do you think? Was Jake Gyllenhaal right to walk away from the conversation? Or was Sunny Hostin justified in pushing the issue? Share your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout for more real talk show stories.